In an earlier video, we looked at using the basic shapes in Tinkercad to print hollow or vase mode prints on the CocoaPress Chocolate 3D printer. In this video, we're going to look at more complex shapes in Tinkercad that can also be printed in vase mode. Let's start by clicking the magnifying glass icon and searching for a shape called Fractal II. There it is. We'll drag it out, and it's small. So let's increase the size. Let's say 40. Okay, so that should be 40 millimeters by 40 millimeters, more or less. Yep. And if we look at the design, it's way too complex. Those tiny little protrusions will not print well, given the resolution of the Chocolate 3D printer. So let's try decreasing the number of repeats from 2 to 1. Hit Enter. That looks better, like this is much more likely to be printed. So I'm going to click Export as an STL. In my Downloads folder, there's the file. I'll rename it Fractal II. In Prusa Slicer, I'll click to add the model. There it is. Open. Now I'm going to make sure that I'm in vase mode. So I'm going to click on Print Settings, and where it says Spiral Vase under Vertical Shells, and this is under the Layers and Perimeters tab. I'm going to check that box and agree to all the changes. Another change I'm going to make is to increase the first layer from 0.4 to 0.5, and I'm also going to increase the number of bottom layers from 2 to 3 to give it a more solid base. Now I'll go back to the plater, and I'll choose Slice Now on the bottom right, and we can see the print. It has a solid bottom, and the sides are one continuous spiralized outer contour. And if I use the slider on the right, you can see how it's built layer by layer, and within each layer you can use the bottom slider to see the movements of the nozzle. On the left-hand side, we can see that the print will take about 14 minutes, which we could also see on the right-hand side at the bottom, 14-minute print time. And we can see that it'll use about 10 grams of chocolate. So now we click Export G-Code, click on our SD card, and we'll save the file. Notice that the file name already includes the size of the nozzle, 0.8 millimeter nozzle, the time, 14 minutes, and the amount of chocolate it will use, 10 grams. Click Save. Now we can go down to the bottom and click to eject the SD card, plug the SD card into the printer, and print our model. And this is what the printed model looks like. Back to Prusa Slicer. On the bottom left-hand side, we'll click to go back to the editor view, make sure the model is selected, and then click the trash can to delete it. We'll go back to Tinkercad, and we'll move this model over. We know that one works. That's good. The next one we're going to search for is called Matrix. And there it is. This first one, we'll drag that out. This one looks like it will be a very interesting print, kind of a maze-like pattern here. But those walls, remember, will be very thin, and there's so many of them, I'm a little concerned that it will be a little bit too small and fragile. So let's reduce the number of loops from 4 to 3 and see what that looks like. Okay, a little better, but maybe if we make it higher, let's double the height to 10 millimeters. Well, that looks like it would be pretty cool. Now remember, with both of these shapes so far, just to review the requirements for vase mode, we need to have a solid bottom and top, flat bottom and top, and we need vertical sides. And so even though these shapes are complex, they still conform to those basic requirements. Let me just double check before I export this to see how large this is. 36 by 36 by 10, that's still pretty small. Let's increase the size of this here. Let's say the radius is 10. That looks better, so that gives us 60 by 60. And let's make it twice as high. There we go. That looks more substantial. So now I'll click Export as an STL file. In my Downloads folder, I'll rename the file Matrix. In Prusa Slicer, I'll click to add the file. There it is. And I'll just very quickly verify that my print settings are still set. 0.5 first layer height, vase mode is turned on, and I have 3 bottom layers. That's good. I'll click the plater, I'll verify that I'm using the CocoaPress printer with the 0.8mm nozzle and that I'm using the 0.5mm layer height. That's all good, so on the bottom right, I'll click Slice Now, and we can see that this model will use about 21 grams of chocolate and take about half an hour to print. And if we rotate it, we can see it's got a solid bottom and nice straight walls that are printed in a vase mode fashion. And this is what this model looks like when printed in chocolate. Back in Prusa Slicer, we'll click on Editor View, click the model, and delete it. Go back to Tinkercad, and we'll move this model aside. The next one we'll look at is called S-Wall. So I'll search for that, S-Wall. There it is. We'll drag that out. Now that, again, looks too skinny to print well, so we'll have to make some changes. Let's try doubling the wall depth. Okay, I stretched it out a bit. Let's change the thickness from 2 millimeters to 10 millimeters. Now, that's kind of an interesting shape. Again, it has a flat top and bottom, and it has straight vertical walls. And by straight, I don't mean that there aren't any curves, I mean that they're straight up and down. So we can export this file, click on STL, change the name of the file, import it into Prusa Slicer, click Slice Now, and we can see that we have a nice flat bottom and a hollow shape. This one uses a tiny 4 grams of chocolate, and it'll take just 5 minutes to print. So you could print a bunch of these very quickly. And here's the printed shape. Back in Prusa Slicer, click Editor View, select the model, delete it, go back to Tinkercad, and move that shape out of the way. Next, we'll search for a shape called N-lobe. There it is, N-lobe convex. We'll drag that out. This is about 20 by 20, which is just 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters. That's pretty small, so I'm going to try increasing the size. I could play around with the settings like I've done with the other shapes, but another simpler method is to hold down the Shift key and then click and drag on any one of these white squares, and what that will do is increase the shape proportionally. So that's an interesting looking shape. And if you look at it from the side, you can see that even though there's a flat top and a flat bottom, the sides are not 100% vertical. There's a slight angle, but that angle is so slight that it should be okay. And there's one way to know for sure. We'll export it as an STL, rename the STL as N-lobe. In Prusa Slicer, we'll add the file and click Slice Now. And now we can zoom in and rotate around to make sure we don't see any gaps in any of the layers. And it looks like all of these layers are nice and solid. We've got the solid bottom, and the sides are all intact no matter how much we scroll in to look at them. We can't see through any of them. So each of these layers is resting on top of the previous one, so that should be fine. This print will use about 6 grams of chocolate and take about 8 minutes to print. And here's the model printed in chocolate. Back in Prusa Slicer, click to go back to the editor view, click on the model and delete it. Back in Tinkercad, we'll move this shape over to the side. Next, let's search for the metric gear. There it is, this blue one here. We'll drag it out. Again, I'm just going to hold down the Shift key on my keyboard and click one of these white boxes and drag up to increase the size until it's about the size that I want. Export as STL. Change the name of the file. Click to add it in Prusa Slicer, and then click Slice Now. We see the bottom is nice and solid, and we've got the outer contour is nice and solid as well. Rotate around and zoom in to make sure there are no gaps anywhere in the shape, and that looks fine. And this is how the printed model looks when printed in dark chocolate. Back in Prusa Slicer, we'll click the editor view, click on the model, click delete, Go back to Tinkercad. We'll move this model over to the side. And the last one we're going to look at in this video is called Twisted Polygon. Drag that out, hold down the Shift key, make it larger, and we'll examine this shape more closely. It has a flat top and bottom, so that's good. The sides are mostly vertical, but there is some angling of the sides as the twists go around, but not very much. If you look at it from the side, you can see that it's mostly vertical. So will this print or not? Let's try it and see. Export it as an STL file, rename it, open the file in Prusa Slicer, click to slice. Bottom looks good, sides look good. What about these edges? If I zoom in, you can see a little bit of white showing through there. So this shape might pose a problem. It uses just 6.77 grams of filament. It takes 9 minutes. It's a short print, so you could test it and see. It may or may not work. There's just enough of an angle that those layers may not be sitting on top of one another enough. Let's use the bottom slider to see where the nozzle's moving. Okay, it looks pretty good. Let me go down a little bit and look at it. You can see at this corner that the current layer is not sitting completely flush with the layer below, but as I move backwards, it's mostly laying on top. There's just some slight variation, so this may work. We can export the file and print it and see. And indeed, here's the completed print, and it looks fine. Back in Tinkercad, we'll keep that shape as a good shape for printing in vase mode on the CocoaPress Chocolate 3D printer. And we've got 6 new complex shapes that we can use in our confection designs. Now, where did I get all these shapes? If we go back to the basic shapes in Tinkercad, which we explored in an earlier video, you can click where it says basic shapes and scroll all the way down to shape generators. And you'll see there are lots of different shapes that you can explore. And what I did is I just went through and looked at each of these individually, one by one, to see if they might potentially make a good print. Let's see, here's the metric gear that we used. Here's the end lobe convex shape that we used. And there's some others in here that might work well. This flower looks like it might work well. This cute heart, this spruce tree, a star, a simple cylinder. Here's the twisted polygon. Now remember, right, you don't want angles that are too sharp. So this shape, the multi-point cylinder, definitely won't work because of these angled sections. And the shape below it, the flattened cylinder, won't work because the top is not flat and horizontal. It's pitched at an angle. So keep those requirements in mind as you scroll through to look for potential vase mode prints. This circular trapezoid should be fine. And also one last reminder that once you drag a shape out, always take a look at the settings, because by adjusting those, sometimes you can turn a shape that would otherwise not work into a shape that will work for printing in vase mode on the CocoaPress Chocolate 3D printer.